And let's go ahead and dive in. It's 3 minutes after. We'll do introductions. I'm Amy Hutzel. I'm the executive officer at the State Coastal Conservancy. And I'll turn it over to Joel to introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Joel Gerwine. I am the deputy manager for the North Coast program of the Conservancy, and I'll turn it over to Evan.
Everyone, I'm Evan Borgness-Sloan. I'm a deputy manager of the Bay program at the Coastal Conservancy, and I'll turn it over to Marilyn.
Hi, I'm Marilyn Latta, and I'm a project manager in our San Francisco Bay program.
Great. So welcome, everybody. Really great to have you joining us. If you have questions while we're doing the presentation, put them in the Q&A box instead of in the chat, and that'll make it easier for us to address your questions, either right in the Q&A, written response, or addressing them after the presentation verbally. Marilyn is going to be monitoring the Q&A and helping us respond to questions. And we should have enough time at the end to cover all sorts of questions. I think the presentation will be about half of this webinar. We do ask that everyone keep their questions and comments in the chat or in the Q&A constructive and respectful. If you have any technical difficulties, please let Marilyn know, either in the chat or the Q&A, and she will try to help. And again, we're recording this webinar and we're going to post it. And Joel, can you go ahead and pull up the slides? Great. So today we're going to be talking about the Conservancy's strategic plan and our funding situation. And then we'll be focusing a lot of this webinar on our grant application process and how to work with us to apply for funding that fits within the Conservancy's objectives in our strategic plan. We are not going to be covering the Explore the Coast or Coastal Stories grant programs. Those are annual grant programs with their own RFPs, and we have separate webinars for those. And yeah, lots of resources to learn about Explore the Coast and Coastal Stories. We'll be covering all the rest of the work that the Conservancy does. Next slide. Your face, Joel. Yeah, you'll have to get rid of these little. Sure, this PowerPoint's going to come back. Okay, great. You just, yeah, the presentation mode. Little button, bottom right. Great. Okay. So this is our mission statement and our vision. The State Coastal Conservancy's vision is of a beautiful, restored, and accessible coast for current and future generations of Californians. So we act with others. That's a really important part of our mission statement, and that is all of you, to protect and restore and increase public access to the coast. We work along the entirety of the California coast, throughout the 9-county San Francisco Bay Area, up coastal watersheds, and in the jurisdiction of the Santa Ana River Conservancy. So it's about a third of the state geographically and quite a bit of the population. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Evan.
All right, thank you. So the board adopted our strategic plan for 2023 to 2027 on December 1st of 2022. Thanks to all of you who submitted comments. I'm sure many of you on the phone participated in that process. The strategic plan lays out our vision, goals, and measurable objectives, which we will report on to our board annually. The plan was developed in context with 3 major drivers, which I will be touching on, to address inequity, address the climate crisis, as well as our funding, which fortunately is matching the urgency of the moment. more in a couple slides of Coastal Conservancy funds, but state funding is being distributed through many agencies under the Department of Natural Resources. And the 30 by 30 webinar series is a helpful tool for learning more about other agencies' funding. The plan also highlights key strategies for implementation of these goals, including implementing existing state and regional plans like Pathways to 3030, accelerating action, particularly on projects that have been in the planning stage for years, if not decades, as well as building capacity and investment in meaningful engagement, supporting community-based groups in leading or engaging in their projects. Next slide. So here are our 5 primary goals laid out in our strategic plan. Goal 1 is prioritizing equity. At least 40% of our funding needs to benefit systemically excluded communities. The definition of systemically excluded communities is outlined in our strategic plan and on our website. I'm happy to answer more questions if there are any on that definition. Under goal 1, we also have objectives for returning power to tribes, supporting systemically excluded communities through community engagement and technical assistance, as well as incorporating workforce development in our projects. Goal 2 is enjoy the coast. This includes our Explore the Coast programs, our Coastal Story programs. Again, these 2 programs are not going to be highlighted in this webinar. Goal 2 also includes expanding accessibility for people with disabilities, building trails, recreation facilities, and amenities, enhancing piers and waterfronts, Explore the Coast overnight program, which provides lower cost overnight accommodations. Goal 3 focuses on protecting and restoring our coast. Projects can include conserving land, restoring and enhancing habitats, protecting and enhancing working lands, cutting green tape to move restoration work forward more quickly. Goal 4 focuses on climate ready. That can include sea level rise adaptation projects, wildfire resilience projects, multi-benefit nature-based adaptation as well. Goal 5 focuses on our organizational goals, such as supporting our staff and transparency. Next slide. So we have been allocated over $1 billion in total from last year, fiscal year 22-23, as well as fiscal year 23-24. This is a significant investment and has a significant focus on coastal climate resilience. As I'll go through these different focuses. So we have $326 million on coastal climate resilience, $555 million on sea level rise resilience, $37 million on wildfire resilience, $20 million on Coastal Conservancy programs generally, and $112 million specific on priority geographies or projects. That can include programs like Explore the Coast, Sea Otter, Great Redwood Trail, our lower cost accommodations, Santa Ana River, etc. And I do want to highlight that $120 million of the Conservancy's sea level rise funding is a part of the California Air Resources Board's California Climate Investments. So some caveats: a significant portion of the fiscal year 22-23 budgeted funds have been allocated, and we have also started to allocate funds from the fiscal year 23-24, but we still have a lot of funding left, especially for sea level rise projects. We also do not expect grantees to identify which funding source you think will be a good fit for your project. We can match the projects to best fit a funding source internally. Next slide. Now we'll provide some brief information about the application process and new resources the Conservancy has developed to assist potential grantees. Applications may be submitted on an ongoing rolling basis and will be accepted and evaluated when they're received. It's generally a 2-step process to apply, but if needed, applicants can request technical assistance consultations with a regional manager covering their project area to discuss project eligibility. This can be a simple email contact to the regional manager with a short elevator pitch of the project idea first to get initial feedback, or scheduling a brief call to discuss the project details. I thought I turned off my email, but I'm going to do it one more time because it keeps dinging. There we go. Sorry about that. This can be beneficial, especially if there's any concern about basic eligibility, or project type being a good fit with Conservancy's strategic plan goals or our funding priorities. The regional manager can provide feedback to assist the applicant in deciding whether a project concept and team is developed well enough, the lead entity and project goals are eligible, and if it's beneficial to spend time on preparing a pre-application. In many cases, people may choose to go directly to submitting a pre-application as the most efficient first step. The pre-application will be reviewed by a regional manager and staff who will reply within 60 days. If a pre-application meets the Conservancy's eligibility criteria and there's available Conservancy funding for the project, applicants will be invited to submit a full application. Conservancy will again respond within 60 days on whether a grant will be recommended. Conservancy staff evaluate applications based on our project selection criteria. You may be asked to participate in an application interview and/or a site visit to provide additional information to Conservancy staff during the application review process. All of this is just so that we can work with applicants in order to best understand the local environmental and community details as we review a wide diversity of project types. We also want to support partners and help all types of entities and sizes of entities in succeeding in applying for our funds. The regional managers are listed on this slide here, and their contact information can be found on our website. Next slide. So who is eligible for Conservancy grants? Public agencies such as local, state, and federal governments are eligible, as well as federally recognized tribes, nonprofits with 501c3 status, and non-federally recognized tribes and others via a fiscal sponsor. Typical grant amounts range from $200,000 to $8 million, but we do not have a set minimum or maximum. Some of the allowable project activities include land acquisitions, planning, and implementation. We're really interested for planning projects and moving towards an implementation project more than sort of a broad range sea level rise vulnerability assessment at this point. Next slide. To be competitive for funding, projects need to be able to make strong linkages to our strategic plan goals and our project selection criteria. Examples of projects that we can fund include land acquisitions, conservation easements, habitat restoration or enhancement, climate, sea level rise, and wildfire resilience, nature-based adaptation, public access, waterfront access and resilience, and multi-benefit projects. Next slide. Diving into our public access and community involvement project types a little further, these projects can include tribally led projects, land return projects and acquisitions, trails and recreational facilities and amenities, lower cost overnight accommodations, and projects to expand accessibility for persons with disabilities. And project activities that can be funded within these types of projects include community engagement and involvement, co-designing of projects, so not just giving input, but ensuring the integration of community input into the design and community leadership in the project. Workforce development can be included, connected to a specific project. So that can include environmental work trainings, working with a California or local conservation corps, developing and providing apprenticeships at your organization, and job opportunities for local community members and youth to get engaged, trained, and hired. Next slide. We have many new guidance documents and resources to clarify our application process and streamline the steps for applying to grants. We want to help make the process efficient at each step for grantees and partners that have limited time and may need clear guidance on what the Coastal Conservancy funds and how our grant process requirements work. We're committed to increasing the reach and accessibility of our grants and want to further engage local communities and support community-led efforts. Key new resources on our website include the grant application guide, a pre-application and full application templates, and links to other resources, including technical assistance webinars, tips for meaningful community engagement, as well as tips for meaningful workforce development. The regional managers and staff are available to give feedback on initial project ideas in order to help determine eligibility and fit within an available funding source and avoid the need to submit a pre-application if the project won't be considered. The shorter pre-application form is designed to be more straightforward, to complete, share high-level information on the proposed project, and save time in confirming whether a project is a good fit before spending the time to develop a full application. Next slide. The new grant application guide, provides step-by-step instructions on completing our pre and our full application for the Conservancy. Use this guide as you go through your application to help answer questions and provide the appropriate information. This includes a full overview of the main steps, the templates to use, and an application checklist to help make sure all the required information is included in your submittal. The guide also links to our strategic plan and funding priorities and additional resources and technical assistance webinars. Next slide. Other key items in the application guide are the project selection criteria, which include if the project is a good investment of state resources, if the project helps the Conservancy accomplish the strategic plan, if it includes a serious effort to engage tribes, if it benefits, or if the project benefits will be sustainable or resilient over the project lifespan, if the project delivers multiple benefits and has a significant positive impact, and if the project was or will be planned with meaningful community engagement and broad community support. Next slide. There are some key grant requirements to be aware of, including that these are reimbursable grants. You do the work first and then you invoice the Conservancy either monthly to quarterly. All grants must be authorized by the Conservancy board. Please remember, we only have 5 meetings per year, so we have to allow time for that process. After the board authorization, a grant agreement is written and signed by Conservancy and the grantee. You will also need a resolution from your governing body to accept the grant and sign your agreement. You must provide us with a task-based work program and budget, including listing your subcontractors. There's also an insurance requirement of $2 million typically, and you can get input per scale and activities. It's important to not start work under your grant until there is a signed and authorized grant agreement, as well as all of the conditions of that grant have been met prior to work. And now I'll turn it over to Joel, who will share a bit more guidance on the pre-application process.
Thanks, Evan. Okay, so going to talk a little about the pre-application now. As Evan mentioned, it's meant to be an efficient way to get us general information. It's just 3 pages long, plus a site map and photos. And the idea, again, is to reduce the burden on people applying so that you don't have to prepare a full application if the project is not a good fit. My top tip in writing the pre-application is that you want to be specific about your project. Give us a really clear idea of what the project is without getting into all the details. So the pre-application, as Evan mentioned, has been streamlined since last year's webinar on applying to the Conservancy. Much simpler than the old version, which had a budget in it. There's no budget requested now in the pre-application stage. You're just telling us how much funding you're asking for overall. And we took out some other components as well. but the pre-application still has the brief summary, the total amount requested, start and end dates, project description, CEQA status, and who else is involved, and any other funding sources that you have for the project. So now we're going to talk about the brief summary. So for the brief summary and the pre-proposal, we're asking for just one sentence with the essence of your project. That can be a little challenging, but here's a good example of a one-sentence description. The Big Sur Land Trust will acquire the 73-acre Carr Lake property as a first step to creating an urban oasis within the city of Salinas that will provide recreation, flood control, wetland habitat, and build climate change resiliency. So this kind of one-sentence elevator pitch does a really good job at answering who, what, where, and why regarding the project. In this case, who's doing the project? The Big Sur Land Trust. What are they doing? They're acquiring the 73-acre Carr Lake property. Where is it? City of Salinas. And why are they doing it? To create an urban oasis with multiple benefits. So that's kind of what you want to strive for. And thanks to the Big Sur Land Trust for letting us use this example. Now let's talk about the project description section. The project description includes a project overview. This example is from a living shoreline project in San Diego Bay. So the project overview, you're going to talk about why the project is needed. In this case, it's to address shoreline erosion and also to provide benefits for threatened species and communities. And you want to also talk about the kind of regional need and how the community has identified this problem as being a priority. So you can see that regional framing in the bottom of the slide in the context of San Diego Bay, as well as the specific site, project site. The project overview also includes goals, tasks, outcomes and benefits, and who's involved and to what extent. So the main thing here is to be clear and specific so we can really understand the project. For example, the goals listed here help us understand that this project will restore habitat and also reduce shoreline erosion. We'll talk more about tasks, but that's, again, you want to just give us, not get into all the details at this pre-application stage, but give us enough information that we can really understand what the project involves. Okay, so if your pre-application looks like it's going to be a good fit for our funding, we will ask you for a full proposal, and we may, as Evan mentioned, have some discussions with you in the interim, some phone calls, maybe a site visit, before we ask for that full proposal. The full proposal is 10 pages long, so not too onerous compared to some proposals. I'm not going to go through it in detail here. We don't really have time for that today, but you can see a list of what we ask for. And again, the main thing to remember is that the application guide is on our website, and it goes through all the parts of the full proposal as well as the pre-proposal and gives you guidance about how to complete that. I also want to mention another resource on our website, which is the grantee manual. So this is really a manual for folks who have received grants, and it gives a detailed description of how our grants work. You don't really need to read it at the application stage, but there might be specific issues that you want to figure out that would be addressed in that grantee manual. So just wanted to let you know that that is on the website as well. And you can always reach out to us if you aren't sure about something in the application. We are happy to help. You can reach out by email. It may take us a little while to get back to you. Okay, let's talk about project tasks. This is a very important part of the proposal. So you can see in this slide, these are some examples of tasks. that are provided in the application guide, and that show you the kind of thing that we're looking for. At this stage of the full proposal, we're going to want to have a detailed idea of what will be involved in each task. So the tasks might have been listed in the pre-application in a much more high-level way, but here we're going to want to have a better idea of what's really going to be involved. Here's an example task list for a planning project. And you could describe, this would be the list, and then you could describe what's involved with each task in more detail in your proposal. So it doesn't have to be too complicated, but you can see that this list gives us an idea of what the planning project will involve. And the task table in the full application is also going to ask for estimated start dates and end dates for each task. We understand the schedule for the project is going to depend on when you get your funding. So you can give us your start dates from when you receive your funding. For example, the start date for a task could be when funding is received, and the completion date could be 12 months after funding is received. Main thing here is to be realistic with your timeline, because we really want to understand when the project will be ready to start. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the project budget section of the full proposal. Here is an example of a summary budget. You want to make sure that your budget, the tasks in your budget, exactly correspond to the tasks in your narrative project description. So that you have the same tasks listed, and we don't get confused about what the project really involves. In this table, you'd just be providing the costs associated with each task, but there is also a budget justification section of the proposal that asks for an explanation of what those costs are. You'll see there's a column here for other funding. We don't actually require matching funds for our grants, but if you do have them, you should show them in your budget. You can also show those matching funds in a separate table if you'd like, or just provide us the information in narrative form if you don't want to break them out by task, because sometimes that's not the way your matching funding will work. You can include a task for project management that involves things like invoicing us and giving us progress reports and so forth. You can also include indirect costs at the rate that you have calculated for your organization. We allow indirect costs up to 20% of the total grant amount. So that's not an indirect cost rate of 20%, but it's an indirect cost that would total 20% of the total grant amount. So once you've completed your proposal, you're ready to submit. It's very simple. You just email it to us. Here's the address, grants@scc.ca.gov. You're just going to send us an electronic copy there. Don't send us a paper copy. Conservancy staff will provide your proposal to the appropriate regional manager. And as Evan mentioned, the review process will take up to 60 days. We ask for those applications in Word. The templates on our website are in Microsoft Word, and you can download them. If you don't have Microsoft Word, you can open the template with a free program like Google Docs, and then download it when you're done writing it as a Word file and email that file to us. As I mentioned, don't submit paper copies, and don't send us more information than we have requested, like PowerPoint presentations or letters of support, and make sure to keep a copy of your proposal for your records. All right, that is everything for our presentation, and now we have half an hour or so to cover some of your questions. Marilyn, do you want to share some of those questions with us?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Sorry, my button was taking a minute there. We've had a lot of great questions and I have put some answers in, but I'm happy to follow up if anybody feels like they still had questions. And some of them maybe need a little bit more context. So first one is, would it be possible to share a copy of the meeting chat with people's affiliations listed? It's great to see all the organizations interested in grant funding, and this would be helpful for grant collaboration on a regional basis. I'm not sure if we typically share the chat, so I wanted to open that to my colleagues.
I think we can. It's going to require some technology on our part, so we'll figure that out.
Yeah, we should be able to get a copy of that. Okay, and then the second one is pretty easy. Can you please show the map again from the first slide? That was from Michael Comstock. And there, I'll join with another question. There was a question about our jurisdiction or where we can fund projects and how far inland we go. So in the chat or the Q&A answer, I noted that for our San Francisco Bay program, we can fund projects in the full 9 counties of the San Francisco Bay Area. And then for the other regions, our North Coast, Central Coast, and South Coast, it's coastal watersheds, you know, and riparian areas that have a direct connection to the coast. But I welcome others to clarify or add.
I would just add that generally, you know, a lot of the work that we support is closer to the coast. We can work up to the upper extent of coastal watersheds. As we move up the watershed, we typically look for a stronger connection to coastal resources like salmonids, for example, for like a fish passage or fish habitat project. So this is our jurisdiction, and wildfire projects are another example of projects where we've worked further from the coast than we have in the past as well.
And one other exception in addition to what Marilyn said with the entirety of the 9 Bay Area counties is the Santa Ana River program, which is the entire Santa Ana River watershed that goes all the way up to Big Bear.
And just the last comment on that is that, you know, it also depends on the funding sources we have that Evan and Joel and others just went through, Amy. So for example, they referenced a lot of sea level rise, adaptation funding. So it also depends on those priorities. Yeah, okay, so let's go back to the Q&A. Why did it go away? Would including sign language interpretation for educational events be considered appropriate for expanding accessibility?
I'm going to say yes. I mean, that would be one part of an overall grant application. So, you know, you're applying for a given project, maybe it's planning and design of restoration or public access. And as part of that, you have a task for community engagement, and that community engagement work could involve sign language interpretation.
Great, thanks, Amy. So the next one is, can we request acquisition and design permitting restoration funding at the same time? I answered a separate question that generally for planning and permitting, we recommend that you apply for that phase and complete that because our board needs CEQA findings before they can consider any authorization of funding for implementation. But because acquisitions are exempt from CEQA, I wanted to welcome my colleagues to add to that answer for this particular one.
Yeah, I would just chime in and say we have frequently funded both acquisition and planning for management of the property being acquired. So that's something that we can do. But again, we do have to we can't include implementation at the same time for CEQA reasons, as Marilyn mentioned.
Might be a good one to get some input, via an email or a short phone call with the regional manager, to be very clear. Because again, the acquisition would be exempt from CEQA, but then the planning for trails, amenities, bathrooms, parking spaces, et cetera, would need CEQA and that type of approval before implementation could move forward.
Sorry, Marilyn, I just want to chime in on that. I think if you are, if you're interested in doing a land acquisition and then restoring the habitats on the land, I think most of the regional managers are going to advise you to first apply for the land acquisition. We're not going to go to our board with a grant for both acquisition and restoration unless there's complete confidence the land acquisition is going to actually close.
Thanks, Amy. So the next one is, how detailed are the design plans required to be? I'll say that, we don't require, full design plans and specifications or anything with the grant application, but it should be pretty far along your scoping of, what you plan to do, what you are asking for funds for, what design planning you plan to do. So maybe those designs plans aren't created yet, but you're asking for funding to do that design work. So you can also talk to the regional managers, but we don't actually require design plans with a grant application. Great, unless anyone has anything to add. The next question is, if we have matching costs that we would like to show, can they include costs incurred prior to execution of the grant agreement? I think our answer is yes, but it's not like 5 or 10 years prior. It should be directly tied to the phase that you're working on or the project, current project that you're working on. I welcome others to chime in. And there was another.
I would just say, it's, again, we don't require matching funds. Like, it's good to know that you have them, and that certainly can make your proposal stronger. But to the extent that, prior support and effort that has gone into the project helps us to understand the support for the project and where you're at with the project and who's involved, then that's very useful information, as long as, like Marilyn said, it's within recent memory and relevant to what you're doing next.
Yeah, that's great. We had another question on whether it's required. It's not officially required, as Joel said, but it does help address the project selection criteria better in those ways in terms of leverage and support. So it can help you to rank a little higher in your review process. The next question is, how long can the budget extend? More than 2 years? And generally, yes, our generally bond funding is 3 years, but I know we're thrilled that there's a little more time with the general fund monies that we have now. And so, Amy, do you want to remind us, is that 5 years roughly, or even longer with some of those fund sources?
Yeah, some of it varies with the different appropriations. I would say, when you are submitting your application, be very realistic about your start date and end date. So don't put an earlier start date than you actually think you can do, and let us know how long it's going to take to do all the work. And then we will discuss with you, whether our funding can last that long, or if it's for, some portion. But yes, typically our grants are multi-year grants.
Great. So the next one is, we were referred to you by our ADA consultant. We're a very small special district in need of an ADA accessible beach wheelchair under 5,000. Is that too small to apply for under these grant guidelines?
We just gave a grant to Orange County Coast Keeper, and I saw your question, and I've been furiously Googling trying to find the details. I will follow up with you. We did do a beach wheelchair grant program ourselves a few years ago. This year we decided we'll give a larger grant. I think it was 200,000 to Orange County Coastkeeper, and they are going to be distributing the smaller grants, like a $5,000 grant, to sub-grantees. So local government, nonprofits, tribes. And that is Sherry Pimsler. I am going to look that up and get the info to you, and your email's in there. Great, thank you.
Great. Well, there was a question that I had answered. There was a request for just all the information, in one place. What would be required from application to preparing for board meeting to actually requirements with a grant agreement and the process. And so we do have a grantee manual on our webpage. It's under the grants and resources page. I think we got a good suggestion to also add it to the grant applications page so people can see it in both places. And then the second question here is remind applicants that there are state of California limits on some things like lodging and per diem. Would anyone like to cover that, or I'm happy to? We basically require our grantees to stick to the same requirements that state employees have. So there are daily limits for things like mileage, travel, and travel can be included for things like a conference or for a project. But yeah, those per diem reimbursements have a particular requirement with state of California. And that's a document that I think is on our website, where we can make sure that it is.
I'll just mention that's in flux right now. It's just the new contract for state employees has changed, increased those rates. So stay tuned.
Okay. Even though it's in flux, it is on our grantee manual. I just put a link specifically to the travel guidance.
Can you guys still hear me? Okay, great. I'm not gone. Okay, the next one is, I presume that grant funded costs can only be those incurred after execution of the grant agreement. If not, what is the date to use? So yes, these are reimbursable grants. So you want to wait till your grant agreement is in place and your conditions precedent, like a work program and insurance, resolution from your board if needed, before work starts. But there are some situations where we can advance funds, especially to small community-based organizations, and I welcome others to chime in on that. Amy or Evan?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say, like, that's something we've done in our Explore the Coast program, and we can do in other cases. As Evan mentioned, we're really trying to make our grants more accessible. So if that's a critical issue for you, let us know and we can try to work with you on advancing. We have limits on how much funds we can advance at a given time and how we do it, I believe. So we're working on that, but you can definitely get in touch if necessary. But typically our grants are reimbursable grants. And I'll just say one other thing about that. Often the way that works, depending on the project, often it can be the case that a subcontractor does the work, invoices the grantee invoices us, we pay the grantee, then the grantee pays the subcontractor. So you don't actually have to have put out the cash necessarily. The work has to have been done. You have to have been invoiced before we can disperse the funds. So you may already know that, but I just thought that was worth explaining. Sometimes people do have to, it just depends on the project, but it can be that sort of situation where people are waiting to be paid, but have not actually expended cash while waiting for their reimbursement.
Great. The next one is how long can a project extend? Do funds need to be expended by a certain number of months from funding receipt? Generally, these are, well, they can range from 1 to 3 or more year projects with the longer time frame that we have with the general funds. There's no certain number of months from receiving funding because it really is specific to the scale and activity of the project. Welcome any others to chime in there. Okay, no letters of support are recommended. So those are not required with the pre-application. And actually, Evan, why don't you remind me the current status of the full application? I believe they are welcomed there.
I don't believe so, but we do ask for letters of recommendation before we go to our board if you were to be selected for a board authorization. So we would definitely be looking for those and would want in the full application it described who is working on the project, who supports the project. But I'll just double check that. I don't think it is required.
I think you're right. I think it was actually one of the steps we made to reduce burden on folks with applying. So I think it was purposeful that we don't require them. It is still good to reference in the body of the application your partners and support. But yeah, it's just for if you're in recommended to the board for a grant that we welcome them then.
I just want to make sure that's clear. Staff is reviewing applications, and then we are making a staff recommendation to our board and member board. You can look on our website for who those board members are, and they vote on grants, on grant authorizations. So seeing, they want to see support letters, but we don't need them to review your application.
Thank you, Amy. That's great. You mentioned a focus on sea level rise, but there are themes of projects that are likely to rise to the top of getting funded.
Yeah, I would just say we have quite a bit of sea level rise adaptation funding, as Evan mentioned. So about half of our funding is really sea level rise in focus, and that could be nature-based sea level rise adaptation or kind of gray-green hybrid adaptation. The other types of projects we're very interested, and this also applies to those sea level rise projects, are multi-benefit projects. So, you know, is the project restoring habitat for wildlife and providing public access for people and helping California adapt to climate change. And there was another question about types of wildfire resilience, and I think some of that applies, some of what I just said applies there too. So we're looking for wildfire resilience projects that are working with nature. So, you know, projects that also restore the health of forests, for example.
That's a great segue. The next question is how much funding is remaining of the 37 million mentioned for wildfire resilience?
I think there's probably about 20 million. That's my off the cuff guess, but Joel, do you know better?
I think actually that 37 million might be what we still have to, we have another, yeah, because there's some remaining from our past funding and then an additional 23 million that was just recently appropriated. But so I think it's over 20 million, maybe closer to 30 at least.
So we can follow up on that. It's hard to answer those on the fly without full accounting there. Let's see. Please confirm every single grant offered is a reimbursable only. So most grants are reimbursement, but we do allow for some advanced funds, especially to community, small community-based organizations. So I think that's best to talk about with the regional manager if you have a specific project question. If already approved for a past grant, are we able to request additional grant funding for succession of a program? Yes, we allow multiple phases. And, you know, for instance, a planning phase could be funded, and then an implementation or construction phase could be funded. So yes, we do allow for that. Please forgive this basic question, but are grants limited to projects on the coastline? So we actually answered that earlier. They don't need to be directly on the coast shoreline on the beach, but there is, needs to be within coastal watersheds and then have a connection to coastal resources. And specifically in this SF Bay and in the Santa Ana River area, we can have a broader area around those full watersheds, including the 9 counties of San Francisco Bay. Here's one. The proposal we have in mind would take place on city-owned property. We are a very small nonprofit. I'm wondering in this case if the city should be the applicant. Can a local government be the applicant? That answer,
Yes.
yes, but I'll pass it over to Amy to chat more.
Yes, and it sounds like they might be the more appropriate applicant, particularly, let's say, if they own the land.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add in, sometimes, you know, we can be flexible on that. Of course, if someone else owns the land where the project you're applying for is going to take place, then it would be really important for us to know that they're on board with the project. But it's frequently the case that a nonprofit is better suited to do the contracting or to actually implement maybe you're more flexible in receiving and spending grant funds. So, you know, we've had those projects quite a bit where a friends group implements a project at a park, for example, even though they don't own the land, and we just need to then, you know, make sure the landowner is part of the team, but they don't have to be the grantee. But they could be, the local government could be.
Great. Are projects that don't involve purchasing land or directly modifying the coast habitat still eligible? For example, restoring an endangered species by breeding and then releasing it. We certainly fund projects besides direct acquisition or restoration. I think that particular example would certainly require some special discussion. I think that would be fairly rare or unique for our funding, but certainly could be eligible. And I would suggest the regional manager you reach out with questions. They welcome others to chime in. I'll just say people continue adding your questions, even though we're getting close on time, because we will do a FAQ page and respond to these after if we can't get through them all. If the project is a feasibility study, it may not be possible to define end date of implementation until feasibility study is complete. Is this okay? We would encourage you to apply for planning in that case, and you know, it would not include implementation, so you don't need to know that date.
Yeah, and we probably could not fund the implementation phase of a feasibility study because you wouldn't have CEQA completed.
Wildfire resilience is a broad topic. Are you looking for specific types of wildfire resilience work? Pass that to Joel or others.
I could speak to that a little bit. There is more information about our wildfire resilience program on our website, but generally there is kind of a broad type. We're generally looking for wildfire resilience projects that also have habitat benefits. For example, sometimes we'll see vegetation management projects that reduce the risk of wildfire and also restore an oak woodland. That's a great type of project for us to support. We've also been focusing quite a bit on wildfire resilience planning because CAL FIRE has a lot more funding for implementation of these projects than we have. So one thing that we can do is tier projects up for implementation funding, which tends to be more expensive than the planning. And I'll also mention that we do like to see workforce development incorporated into wildfire resilience projects where that's appropriate. So we've supported training, for example. We know that that's a need in the wildfire resilience world. And tribal engagement with wildfire resilience is also a great thing when that can be incorporated.
Great. The next one is, can you talk more about workforce development and examples of how this has been successful for other organizations? I am happy to answer that, but I welcome others to jump in if you would like. So it should be tied to an actual implementation project. And examples include engaging local conservation corps in trail building, bridge work, sea level rise adaptation planning, and fabrication of oyster reef balls, all these kinds of activities. So doing trainings and developing eco-apprentice programs, for example, those are all examples of workforce development. We actually have a tip for workforce development guide on our website that also goes into topics like encouraging prevailing wage, encouraging a living wage, and other examples.
I'll just mention, Marilyn, that was a great answer. Just want to mention, I recently was meeting with Russian Riverkeeper on one of their wildfire resilience projects for runda removal. And they have worked with a partner organization called North Bay Jobs for Justice to try to address some of those workforce development, living wage types of issues with an organization that has strong ties to the folks who are involved in the relevant in the workforce that is working on those crews. So I just encourage people to reach out to those types of organizations as well for a partnership if you don't have that expertise in those contacts yourself.
Thank you. Great. Shall we do one more or shall we wrap? Shall we fit in one more real quick? Okay. If we are trying to acquire land, how would we know how much to request if we don't yet have the funds to be able to negotiate with the current landowners? I guess we could estimate, but what if we are way off? Can we request more funds since there is no max request? We do provide funds for planning, but I actually am going to defer to my colleagues on planning for acquisitions and giving a clear answer here.
We have made grants for pre-acquisition studies to help fund the cost of appraisals and title reports and the types of things you need beforehand. But I think in that case, just get in touch with us about the acquisition and we can see what the best approach would be for your specific situation, because it does take time to go to our board and execute a grant agreement. And so it all just depends on so funding the pre-acquisition work that way can just add time to the whole process. So it just kind of depends on the situation. Good to get in touch and talk to us about it.
Great. Well, I think we will follow back up. We'll make sure to provide a FAQ with answers to the rest of the questions. And we really appreciate everybody participating in our webinar, and regional managers are all available. And there's a lot of great information on our website under the grants page and the grants resources page. So great job.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah. Have a great day, everyone.